Recording, by the way. There
It is now.
we go. So we're having some folks kind of come in. I know we've got some folks that were said that they were going to be traveling, but so JGP, your specific topic that you wanted to cover this week was kind of BI's place in data mesh. And I had a panel on this for Data Mesh Radio because I think this is a really important topic. Ryan Dali and Amara Ghafour and Elif from AtScale. But like, when you start to think about BI, what are you actually thinking about when you're thinking about it in data mesh? Because there's some people that are using BI as the data product owners. There's some people that are using it in a lot of different ways, and it's very kind of fragmented from all the people I've talked to. So what are you even thinking of when you say business intelligence?
So a lot of people are actually thinking about BI, just kind of advanced reporting, right? Or BI dashboards, or with this nice pie chart and that are dynamic and changing and all those things. So it's really I would say one of the first consumer of data is often BI and business analysts that are using this data for intelligence purposes. So that's really there, because in the old days, you would take your Cognos or your business objects, and you would connect it to your database, and voila, you've got your reporting solution, you've got your BI dashboard. And now in data mesh, there's nothing like a standard port you connect to a data product. Okay, so the question could be, where do you put BI? Okay, is it bypassing the data product in the mesh, or is it part of the data product? So these are the kind of questions that I was kind of curious to ask as well in parallel, because it's really, there's so many there's so many different options. So
Yeah.
Oh, and Paul raises a question. Raises his hand. Go ahead, Paul.
Hold on,
saving
Paul.
me.
One quick second before, but I was literally going to tell. We've got a lot of new people coming in here as well. So if at any point you want to talk, Paul just did it. He raised his hand via the Zoom feature. Please do that yourself, and we'll call on you. So yeah, Paul, would love to hear kind of your thoughts here, because a lot of our conversation, I think, all overlapped here well. Oh, you're still muted. Muted you back. There we go.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I have a bunch of thoughts, and some of them, some people might disagree with. So I'm perfectly fine with that. But I think of BI, particularly because in my organization, we use Power BI. That's the front end that we use. I think of it in two fashions. There is the model. So the model is really the data, the relationships, tables, can have a bunch of DAX measures defined inside of it. And then you create separate reports that point to that model. So you might have like 50 reports that all point to like a sales model, and that has all kind of like your sales information on it. The sales model, like the model piece, to me, that seems like that is essentially the tables that I have in databases. And that, to me, that is a data product. That is one output port of the data product in the table, like the actual tables. If somebody wants to do direct querying against the tables in the SQL and the data warehouse, that's another output port in the same data product. So that's one piece of it. And then the other piece is the report itself. This one is a little kind of tricky in my mind, is because the report itself can have a bunch of logic and a bunch of measures and a bunch of calculations that all need to be kind of defined and maintained, and people be able to understand and discover those as well. So my initial thoughts are that should be a different data product that's essentially linked to, through lineage linked to the model data product. But that's the one that's kind of a little off to me because it's not truly kind of a data product, but it kind of is. So that's my initial thoughts.
Yeah, well, and I think so this lines up like Paul, exactly what you said of people are going to disagree with you simply because everybody's doing this differently. And JGP, I'd love to hear kind of what you've seen. Michael, I saw you pop on as well. So howdy, if you want to give kind of your view on this. But I've seen BI live in 15 different ways or so in data mesh, because I've seen people have BI embedded into the domains and they're only internal facing. So they're only looking at having their, anyway, sorry, Michael was just asking the context of the question. It's kind of, what does BI look like in data mesh? Like where in general does it all fit? And so I've seen teams where there's kind of a centralized team of BI because so many of the people that are asking questions of the data mesh are asking cross-domain questions. I've seen places where data analysts are the data product owners, and they're really the concept of their data products are Paul, a little bit of what you were talking about of the dashboards and the downstream reports and the things like that their concepts aren't the raw data as much from that data product kind of concept. They're more of a completed aspect of what they're sharing to people. And so I'm seeing places where it works and I'm seeing places where they struggle. I think where I'm seeing a lot of people do go wrong with BI, and this is JGP where I want to see your thing as well, your view on this, is that they kind of think of it as, the underpants gnome of, create data products, question, profit. And there isn't a specific output expected as to why are we creating these data products that can interoperate unless, except for in very specific use cases, if we're not thinking about this as a broad set of our information flows, and that it does allow us to ask questions that we haven't previously prepared for. So JGP, I'd love to hear kind of how you saw it. I mean, I know you were more data scientist at PayPal, but you've worked with other organizations as well and talked with a lot of folks. How are you seeing where this actually sits? Is this in the domain? Is this internal facing? Is this external facing? Like, where are you seeing people sit when it comes to this concept of BI?
So first on that, first two things first. Paul, congratulations on your promotion.
Oh yeah, I was going to say that too. I forgot to say that.
Thank you. Congratulations on your new startup there as well.
Yeah, thanks. The second, I was not expecting the way back, but anyway, and so there's so my experience with that, and when people not only at PayPal but with other people I've talked to about what we're going to do with BI, okay, and the consumption of data really is really there's several things. There's a data and there's a metadata. Okay, so for example, Paul, when you're saying, okay, I'm doing my Power BI report, okay, where am I getting my my list of fields, my list of metadata, where I'm getting that from? Okay, so a lot of times when you're building a report, you're dragging data fields and metadata that is coming directly from your database, that is extracted and creating a schema directly in your BI tool. Okay, like a Tableau of the world, etc. Now, when you're doing that, how does it work with data mesh, or the data product itself? Because then how do you link that? Or do you create this link between the data product and on the other hand the BI tool? Okay, so that's I think that's a really confusing thing. For data scientists, it's much easier because data scientists, they mostly use, at least my experience is they use notebooks, so you can do a lot of tricks in Python for them. So not saying it's better or easier, but you can do things. But when you've got a closed tool, I would say like a Looker, a Tableau, or and I'm not saying that in a mean way, but you've got a rather closed environment that is connecting to another environment which you just built, and they have the mechanism to get the data and extract metadata. This is where it starts to be a little bit challenging, I think.
Well, because I think this is something that keeps emerging from the conversation around data mesh as to we're still not very good at creating data as if it could be used for any purpose. And so we end up in this thing of again, that kind of underpants gnomes of like, we have prepared the data so people should be able to analyze it. And yet that self-serve perspective doesn't really, it's not happening in a lot of places, or people are hurting themselves because they don't really understand the data. So a lot of what you were talking about, JGP, of like the metadata that's associated with this, instead of just the ones and zeros, can we just visualize and what's happening with the numbers versus what are we actually sharing? And how far, Austin asked this a little bit, but like, how far into the actual application of the data, the actual understanding of the data, does the data product owners like actual ownership extend? And so, there's are we sharing the data? Are we sharing the insights, or the data and the insights, or are we sharing the insights and the so what? Because a lot of times those consumers, the BI, they're trying to figure out the so what, and they're only consuming the data, and nobody's really sure who generates that insight. So, Michael, I saw you come off mute a while ago, so I was hoping maybe you've got some perspective that you wanted to add as well. And Sheetal, hi.
I don't know if my perspective is relevant, but I think going back to every organization is going to approach this problem wildly different. And I think it's always necessary to go back to establishing common principles within your organization on how you're going to approach this. So what principles have you agreed to abide by? Is BI going to be a function of producing the data, or is it going to be a function of the consumption of data? And it really depends on, I think, what the value is on that BI piece that you're actually trying to form. I am someone who thinks a lot of BI should really be owned by the data owners and the teams that are producing the data, because they're best equipped to understand what value it should generate. On the consumption side, I think getting into BI is probably a little bit more experimentational, because you're usually sharing it with people who may not have as much context within your domain on that. I think the other piece is understanding what the organization considers as business intelligence. Is it a metrics dashboard of like what behaviors we're attracting in the mesh? Is it more business intelligence around the data and the value that's being produced when we turn sort of these data sets into full-fledged data products? I think that's the key that's often missing for me. And I think there's a distinction on the platform builders of the mesh itself to provide some level of intelligence around what the scope of the data footprint on the mesh is, so that everyone kind of has a firm foundation of who owns what data, and maybe what are some really important things like what regulatory bounds are on there, what environment, what's the layer, whether it's source, domain, or modeled to a fit for use case. But I think those are really specific questions that need to be answered from a principles perspective first, that then helps the entire organization kind of guide through that, because I don't think there's a one size fits all here. I'll say in our example, we have a federated dashboard we're going to build that measures good data behaviors as part of the data producers' processes. And we're thinking, how do we abstract away that complexity and measure their adherence to requirements that enforce governance, management, and quality directly into the production of data? But each of those domains will also have their own instances where they're building out their own dashboards of business intelligence that's really vested for them. But it's still on the production side that's really creating those dashboards. I don't know, Scott, you nodded your head, so it seems like that resonated with you.
Well, but and JGP, you've had your hand up, so I want to, you never have to actually raise your hand. But the
I know, but
question
it's
that I
the
want to
order
wrap,
of things. Go ahead, Scott.
I want to wrap into this question of what Michael was just saying there as well. Who owns cross-domain questions then, right? Because if we're only talking about, okay, the domains own the things for themselves, consuming the data for themselves, but the cross the execs rarely care about only data from one domain. So like what actually, how does this work out?
That's one thing I wanted to kind of bounce back on. If you're So I heard something, one of your latest podcasts, Scott, where someone from this business card company, Vista, was talking that they were building at first their data product more on a use case aligned, and not really more use case aligned rather than domain aligned, which I find it interesting because I've seen that quite a bit as well. People, so it seems to be an emerging practice. Is it a good or a bad practice? It's still maybe early to say, but if you want to have your BI associated to your use case, and that's where kind of bouncing back on what Michael was saying about who knows the data better, right? The thing is, if your use case aligned, do you have the teams that really knows the data, or are you back to a kind of a centralized team that is shared on your project to build to build just at this time, right? Kind of a half centralized, decentralized, but who has the expertise of the data? I don't think that the data people will have the expertise of the data. They're just engineers there.
Oh, Andrea?
Yes, I think that also use case can be aligned with the domain, but there are also use cases that are not aligned with the domain, that need to cross-join data from different domain. And actually, the greatest value that data can provide is when you join the data across domain in order to optimize, to build use case that optimize the value stream across the company. Because otherwise, if in the data mesh everything happens within the domain, my question to all is a domain just a synonymous of silos? If everything happens within a specific business domain?
I've said this a lot of, if you don't have the cross domain, if you don't have the interoperability, all you have is high quality data silos. Like, so are we doing data mesh to do that?
And sometimes it's good, you just have good quality data silos is better than just an average silo, okay?
That's where I was going to go.
But is it worth the effort?
Here,
is it worth the effort to just do that?
Yeah, I think if I think more broadly around sort of maybe I'm speaking too broadly, but I think one of the premises and promises of a data mesh is to enforce better collaboration such that the people producing and the individuals that are consuming the data to maybe build out those cross-domain and insights and analyses, they don't own the result in a silo. Like, they have to collaborate. And so when you're inherently crossing domains, particularly the ones that cross business units, you can't really do that without a lot of context, conversation, and collaboration. And so to me, it seems to me less about any one group owning that process and more about the avenue of the mesh opening up individuals' ability to cross-pollinate and build that and co-create, which I think is actually part of the democratization of data that data mesh offers. Soapbox.
DGB?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to I agree with you, Michael, but the thing is, I wanted to go back to something that Zaki put in the chat. I don't know if you guys saw it. And Zaki, sorry to put you on the spot here, but when you say headless BI, okay, I've seen a lot of things about headless CMS when I was working a lot with content management systems. It's not the revolution that everybody was expecting, right? So do you see products there? Do you have, yeah, and maybe you can define what is headless BI.
And that was kind of why I didn't touch that question, is because I have that same question of, I've seen 15 different definitions. So Zaki, if you don't mind giving people a bit of your thoughts on what is the definition of headless BI.
I think JGP put me on the spot, actually.
I did. We said it's
No,
interactive.
yeah, no, it's a pleasure to be here. I mean, in our world, the headless BI is how we can offset a data set and publish that data set, irrespective of where's the actual physical storage of that data. Is it on the same cloud of a domain, or if the same data is on another domain, where the API, and this is where the cross-domain reporting comes to. So if we have a domain A with dataset A, and we publish that through an API, the domain B can access the API if they're using Power BI or Looker, whatever tool that they have, without actually worrying about the reporting model that domain A created. So that kind of adds flexibility for them. Number two, if we have multiple domains with multiple data sets, we don't have to worry about the physical locations of these data sets, or what, let's say, GCP projects or Snowflake projects that these data sets are. So that kind of abstract the stickiness of the BI tools to consume these data sets as a products, versus worrying about the consumption layer of these patterns, generally speaking.
Yeah.
But if you're doing that, so if I keep the analogy of headless BI versus headless CMS, okay, so for headless CMS is, you can imagine that it's something like a WordPress or whatever website you've probably all done at some point, at least a page, but you're not doing it, you're just doing the data, and the CMS, the navigation, all this thing is completely disconnected from the content itself. So if you're doing that, and I'm not trying to say it's not a way, because I'd like to explore it, because I really like the idea, but I'm also very concerned about when there's API and data in the same sentence, because depending, if it's just about displaying a pie chart with, let's say 10 values and whatever, then an API is perfect for that. So you're saying that if this API is connected to a data product, but you're drilling down the data so much, then basically in one query, in one REST call, you're getting your 10 values. Is that
Correct, yeah.
correct?
Yeah, and I generally have a lot of reservations on the definition of dashboards. I think BI dashboard definitions is kind of vague now, generally speaking. Like what kind of like creating personas for dashboards, I think is absolutely important before we promote a capability in a domain. Like what kind of dashboard is it? Is it a dynamic dashboard that has a lot of real-time changes, if you like, or it's more of a canned static dashboard that updates every month or quarter or what have you? I think that adds a layer on the design point of view, and how the decision or the motivation to go either a data set or a canned web page that can be shared, generally speaking.
Michael, you want to comment a little bit of what you just typed? It's for the recording, it's awful if people type.
That's fair. No, so I apologize, got distracted by a ping, but I think one of the things that I'm always asking is, anytime there's like some new request for some new business intelligence information or need, it's like, why is this the answer? Why is this a question we have to answer now? And what value are we hoping to get by answering it? Is this going to drive maybe cost reduction? Is it going to generate new business? Is it going to generate some reduction in churn for our customers if we can do that? And then it also generally will help us understand like who's going to own the end result of this BI. Is it going to be a collaboration? Is it going to be within a business unit in the context of their domains? That's been really helpful. And I find that a lot of people tend to have those answers. They just don't share the context with it, but it gives a little bit more information. I think often we just get marching orders and we go through them and we don't ask enough clarifying questions to get at the roots of figuring out like where should this really live and sit.
And I think that overlaps with kind of honestly what Zaki was talking about, of like, how do we do the execution versus how do we do the ownership? versus how do we do, like, is this a nice to have question? Is this a one-off question, or is this an ongoing question? Because what I find, I always find this from a lot of executives, is they want to know the answer to a question, but not necessarily over time. So you create this dashboard that then immediately, once they have looked at it, is no longer useful. It is now completely gone. And so, or like, are we asking enough when we have business intelligence to say, why are we doing this? Do you just want a rough and tumble answer, or do you want something that does kind of become, and I'm sorry, Austin, I realized that you had only pinged me, you hadn't pinged the full chat about this, but like, is the dashboard part of the data product and things like that? Who starts to own it? How does that work? I think that's a question that every organization has to answer for themselves. And I know Zhamak has a view on it, but I've seen ones where it works completely differently, right? I've seen these ones where there's teams that are completely separate, that aren't part of the domains, or I've seen ones where they are part of the domains and their job is sharing their information externally, versus there's ones that are part of the domains that are trying to do those cross-domain queries by going to other domains and bringing in their data. It becomes that, but I think, Michael, what you're pointing to is we just need an answer to it and to move forward and to have a structure to it, instead of, again, this just kind of that keeps happening. So Zaki, I wanted to give you, you had your hand up, so.
Yeah, just to add to that, like generally speaking, and I'm not representing the company I'm working with, like there are a lot of BI dashboard debt. I think all the organizations has a lot of debt that, like you said, Scott, like dashboards being created and on the shelfware for a long time, nobody using it except the person who was using it. But I think what quite find interesting is this framework I read about recently, the decision intelligence framework, how you add value and link that value to a BI request. I think that's something in the exploration phase. I think from industry's point of view, I think that can add that layer of what kind of dashboards do we need, what kind of intelligence we're looking for. I think having that a melting pot between decision intelligence and BI abstraction is important in a mesh world, in my views.
Oh, sorry, very much agree. Yeah, I think a lot of this is it comes back down to communication and decisions and ownership and things like that. It's funny how often that keeps coming up. Sheetal, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thanks, Scott. I know I joined a little late because I joined from India and it's 10:30 here.
It's late.
And I really want to, but most of the time something or the other comes up. And I'm just trying to get a head around of the discussions, a very interesting topic of how we can structure the BI to and relate to data mesh, right? And is that the topic, how we can structure? Because right now the BI is... we have organizations which are very matured, and we have organizations which are maturing and getting on to data mesh. My observation has been BI is very ad hoc right now. It's more driven from a data warehousing perspective. That's a minimum structure that we have. Then we have ad hoc because, I want to see reports, send this request, and somebody does the query and gives. So it's ad hoc, which we cannot clean up. But in a fixed forward strategy, wherever the data products are getting created, I think that part can be a little bit governed, right? And slowly, we need a structure within the BI to ignore what is already there and let that continue, because we can't stop and that will always be there. But still have a governance where the data mesh starts getting implemented and data products are getting onboarded. That becomes also a catalog for our data products. It has to be all of it, right?
It should be a virtuous circle, right? The thing is, you're creating your data products, and then you have other data products, a little bit like what Zaki said that are kind of consumed in a more ad hoc way directly, and then those data products kind of chain. And I think that's a little bit where you're building a mesh.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
And I see a moment of revelation in Scott's eyes. Oh, that's what it is.
I feel like and this is the question of when we say what is BI's place in data mesh, it becomes a very, very complex question simply because are we talking about, again, like who's doing it? How does it work? How does it fit? Like every time I bring this topic up, it seems to go in a completely different direction, simply because I think kind of if we go back to the very beginning of what is the definition of BI becomes, and like, what are we actually trying to achieve? It's so much of this conversation keeps coming back to exactly that. I think a lot of what Sheetal was saying just plays into that of like, are you a mature organization or an immature organization? How are you structured before you start doing data mesh versus how do you want to be structured? It's not as if you go, we're doing data mesh and therefore our entire way of doing business intelligence completely changes versus how was the organization doing this before and how do we evolve it so it fits our new needs? But that means that it looks completely different in almost every organization I poke at. It looks shockingly different when people are kind of expecting it to look exactly the same, and yet it's kind of an afterthought. This was something that came up in the panel that we did. Ryan, I think, was the one that was talking about it. He kept saying, like, it just becomes this afterthought. It's this, oh yeah, we'll get to BI. It's this last mile of analytics. And yet we're doing all this work to deliver information and then not acting on it because we don't know, we're not generating the insights or owning the insights or owning the actual outcome of the insights, like the actual action.
So I have a point here, right? So first of all, if we get lost in fixing the BI, we'll get lost actually. So ignore the past, let that continue, and try to put some governance across the future once the data mesh is started. Now, once the data mesh implementation is started, the request that comes, so it's still, BI is still, most of the times the organizations who have BI, the request comes through the BI, right? So now they are having a matured KPIs, business KPIs, and to meet those business KPIs, then the request goes to deliver the data products. And now if the data mesh is implemented, the data products are more curated in a data product way, following the access principle and all, and they get reflected on the BI. And with some attention there and some intention there, it can really look clean. And some of these insights could be duplicate of what's already existing in the historical reports, but that's fine. That's fine. But so, slowly the weight shifts towards the future KPIs, the future data products. And as the, as more and more data products get implemented, the old will just remain or just phase out or become insignificant and not being used, not being read. So, you then apply all those principles to see which are the ones you decommission. Things which have not been visited in 6 months, maybe you don't need it.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you said in there is really, really important to drill into a little bit of like, hey, even if your data mesh implementation is considered a greenfield, your organization is a brownfield, right? Or if you're a brand new organization that just came out of nowhere and you're doing data mesh, I think that's probably not the best call. But like, how do you transition your already existing BI into the world of data mesh once you start to have the information available to replace those reports? I think far too often we have people that are trying to shove people onto only sourcing their information from data mesh instead of having a long tail distribution or a longer period to do that they're trying to force insights on a lift and shift basis, or you're trying to force them over to the data mesh too soon, and it creates more challenges than it helps. And so like you have to, but you also have to not just let people continue to only source their information from the legacy systems. And so it becomes this big challenge as to how do you get people over here. And I think, Sheetal, you pointed to this a little bit. And I talked to a few people who are doing this where they're trying to get like just about any new source of information is only on the data mesh. So if you want to involve that new information in what you're doing, the only place to get it is to start using your mesh. And so then it begets more people using it.
Yep,
The virtuous circle.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing it happening, right? So I'm actually seeing it happening in the organization that I'm working. The new source of requesting for the information. So suppose I'm an analytics team and I need a set of KPIs for a sales, I've got a request for the sales team to present a set of KPIs of sales across regions and across this. If the data mesh is kicked off in the organization, it goes through a formal request to the corresponding data product business team and the data product owners. And then the request goes to the corresponding Salesforce systems who now curate the data products, and it then comes on the BI dashboard with all the required information. Now, historically, this information is there in some form in the same BI, in a different BI report. But because the request is channeled through a different route in a more matured way, the BI is automatically evolving. It's organically evolving, right? And the sales team and the machine learning team and analytics team, everybody is using these BI reports, and nobody's anymore using. So with period of time, people start shifting to the new reports, and the old ones will not get used. And I don't think there's a conscious effort to migrate the reports or migrate the dashboards will work, because it also depends on the business, right? So if suppose I have a business A and a business B, and business A, there's nothing much happening. They had requested for some reports like 2 years back, and they're surviving and they're happy with that, and nothing more is happening. But business B, there's a lot of action happening, right? There was happening, the sales are changing, the market shutting down. So now they need a very different view and KPIs to get the reports. So they request for the new reports. And in last 1 year, data mesh has kicked off. So their channel of reporting now goes to a different channel, and they have a set of reports. So this business B will be shifting to the new reports, but business A is like happy with the old reports. But when dynamics change in their business, they'll request for new reports, and that will go through the data mesh routes.
Yeah, well, and I think this is where we can kind of start to say, like, what is our actual recommendation here for organizations? I think what you're saying, Sheetal, is to provide more and more better information, and people will migrate naturally. I've seen some people create artificial deadlines and say, hey, in 3 years, we're shutting this down, start to migrate over, we're giving you a very long tail, but in 3 years, this is gone. Where I'm seeing people go wrong is that we're doing it in 6 months. Like, move everything over right now and try and shove and instead of encourage people and give people more and more capabilities. And I've also seen the thing where somebody will say, we'll have 2 different reports from, sourcing the data from the data mesh and the old way. And, one will say 24.232 the old way, and the new way says 24.241. And they're like, this is different. Therefore, the old way has to be right because I've been using it for so long that the new way has to be wrong, and therefore I can't trust the new way. So, like, if we're heading into the wrap up, what do people think are some good advice out there for people that are trying to think about implementing BI and having it actually be a value driver in data mesh? Where should it sit? Like, how do you encourage BI to actually drive value instead of, again, only being the existing use cases and only being about what the data products were exactly created for versus new use cases emerging? So JGP, I'd love to hear kind of where from this conversation, what are you thinking more about BI, or what more did you learn from BI's place in data mesh?
Well, first, I was kind of thinking that nobody was really interested, because it's true that and as Ryan mentioned, it's like BI is a kind of the afterthought. Okay, you're building your data mesh, and then at some point you just you just start thinking about, oh, okay, well, I'm going to consume the data, or I'm going to apply that to BI. So I think it's pretty good that we actually have a little community that is passionate about it. I like a lot of where Shital is going, and this and I think there's really this creation of this. Hey, there's a lot of value in using data mesh for that, for BI. What I still don't see as a best practice, okay, or as ideally I'd love to have at some point something like, okay, you're in this kind of category of use cases, okay, you're building let's say a regulatory report. Then because it's a regulatory report, you need to make sure that it's compliant, that it's following the data governance rule, blah 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 blah. So you've got no choice, and you've got to use your data coming from a data product, whether it's in an headless BI or as a BI. But the thing is, the direct consumption of the data that is being owned by a data product. And in other cases, like, oh, it's just an ad hoc report, we don't really care, blah blah blah. It's just something I've just been asked, and we'll productize it later. A bit like what the discussion we had last week about uncharted versus industrialized. Then in that situation, we can directly access data or something. Okay, so there's still, I think there's maybe this kind of cases we still need to work a little bit, and to drive. Ideally, I'd like to come with good practices, okay, because everybody's agreeing to say that it's different in every company, and I think it's even different. There's different cases in each company as well, so it's kind of a huge mess out there. But I'd like to be able to drive people towards, hey, this is a kind of ideal solution. This is a solution that, okay, it's okay for an interim solution, and sometimes you can just do ad hoc as well. So I think it's opening our minds, okay, on all that. I've scheduled another of our BI talk because I saw the passion about it, with Ryan. So on December 14th, okay, so Ryan will be here. He's not doing his big data browsers or super data browsers show. He's coming with us, okay, so we'll have a more discussion around that on December 14th. And next week we're talking about team topologies, and for that I also invited Eric Broda because he's kind of passionate about this topic. So thank you everybody for joining. We are kind of at time. Love this session. I love the energy. Austin, don't be shy. You don't have to just type. You can also talk. And well, see you next week. Okay. So okay. yes, I have updated my Mac. Okay, guys, thank you so much, and see you next week. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.